Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle, and I'm back for another show. And I have a lovely guest, Liz, who's going to talk all about homeschooling. And I'm super excited to dive in with her. So, Liz, can you just introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here. It's really exciting. Yes, so I'm Elizabeth Hanson, otherwise known as Liz, and I'm a homeschooler, and I am a huge advocate of homeschooling for families. So I've spent about 24 years in the field of education. I got into it in a very unexpected way. You know, I I took my children to the park one day with some friends, and it happened to be the homeschooling park day, which we didn't know about. I was already planning on homeschooling, but one of the parents came up to us. They were the recruiter for the homeschoolers, and she said to us, she just started talking about homeschooling, and she told us that her daughter was 4 years old, and she was, reading classic books, and I started to panic inside because I was planning on homeschooling, and the idea with homeschooling is that your kids are ahead, right? And I'm like, oh my God, my kids are already behind. We had this conversation, and then towards the end of the conversation, her daughter walked up, and I just remember she had she had glasses, but they were very thick lenses, like I'd never seen before on a child. And so, anyways, I'm walking home and I'm in a panic. I was already planning on homeschooling. I've been putting together a curriculum. I've been telling all my friends, we need a homeschool. And so I went home and I started to work with my daughter on phonics because she was about 4.5 going on 5 at the time. And I could see it wasn't clicking for her. I knew she was super intelligent. Obviously, we all know our kids are super intelligent,
Right.
but it wasn't clicking. And so the next day I said, honey, let's do phonics. And she was very excited about learning how to read. So again, we sat down, and after about 10 minutes, again, it wasn't clicking. So the third day, you know how kids are funny where they think that if they don't look at you, you don't see them. So she
Hmm.
was kind of like moving along the wall, looking at the wall, hoping I wouldn't see her. I was like, honey, should we do our phonics lesson? And she just looked at me and she looked so disappointed. She said, can I go out and play? And I said, yeah, sure, honey. So something just told me to say yes. So anyways, that afternoon I went to the bookstore and I thought, okay, something's going on here because I didn't learn how to read until first grade. And I'm thinking suddenly, why is everybody teaching their children to read at 4 years old anyways? Because I had actually never heard of this before, that park day. So I went to the bookstore and I started looking for books that spoke about early education, and particularly that it wasn't a good idea because I'm already thinking this isn't a good idea.
Hmm.
So I found two books. There were only two books at the time, and one was a satire in kindergarten, very funny, but basically just making fun of people who had those bumper stickers that said "My kindergartners," at the top of the class or something. And the other one was by David Elkin, Preschoolers at Risk. And I recommend anyone with young children read this book. But it was very eye-opening for me, and I realized, I mean, he's a child developmental psychologist, and basically he was saying it's so harmful for children
Yeah.
to be taught at these early ages, and
Yeah.
it's just killing so much. So that
Yeah.
was kind of how I really dug into the world of not just homeschooling, but what's going on with our system. Like, what are we, why are
Yeah.
we approaching education in such a different way from how it was when I grew up? So,
Yeah.
anyways, so my organization is really about helping parents just give their children a wholesome childhood. I start with the early years, preferably right when they're born, if not before, and then just taking them through the educative years. Yeah.
And so what do you see? I know I love this other story that we could talk about in a little bit, the other story of this little boy that we talked about before, but
Yeah, sure.
what do you see, that is hard for parents? What do they have to let go of? What do they get stuck on? What are the challenges with parents that they wanna do homeschooling, like I always did, but I'm an educator, and I could never wrap my head around it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question, Michelle. I from yeah, from the parents that I've worked with and the parents that I've spoken to, I mean, so many over the years, the biggest obstacle I think is fear. It's this
Yeah.
idea that we can't teach our own children and
Mhm.
that we have to go with what the system's doing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think teaching a classroom is very different from homeschooling. From what I know from teacher friends that I have,
Yeah.
it's a very different kind of type of teaching. But what I always tell parents is that we can homeschool our children, and it doesn't matter if a parent has a college degree or not, because they've studied all these things and they know that parents, even if they haven't graduated from high school, can still successfully homeschool their children. As long as I always say you have to have three things. You've got to have an ounce of patience, and really just an ounce, because it's amazing how much patience we can muster up when we're teaching our own children. Not necessarily other children, but our own children we tend to have a lot of patience for.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is determination. It takes a lot of determination. Like, you've got to be committed for the
Yeah.
long ride, because it is some years.
Yeah.
And the other thing is understanding. I think the homeschooling has shifted so much just in the time that I've been in the community. So just having a proper understanding, a vision of what we want for our children. And I think it's a question enough people ask. So
Mhm.
I would say that those three things, but just the sense of, I can do this, because the point is that we're always teaching our children from
Yeah.
the minute they're born. We're natural teachers. I
Yeah.
was I was once giving a talk, and I remember this woman asked that question. She said, how can I teach my own children? And she said, I don't have a teaching degree. And this man, who actually happened to be one of my students, he was a doctor, he's a super bright guy. He just jumped up before I could even answer, and he just said, rubbish. You've been teaching your children from the day they were born. We're all teachers of our children.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it is. It's just having the confidence that we can do this, trusting ourselves and trusting our intelligence. I mean, we're all intelligent people,
What did
and just, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, yeah, no, go ahead.
And just wanting more for our children than what they're going to get in the system.
Yeah. What do you see homeschooling kids? How are they different than kids who go into the traditional system? What do you see the benefits of the homeschooling?
Well, I have to define homeschooling first,
Yeah,
Michelle, because
please.
there's so many different ideas of what homeschooling is today.
Yes.
So I'm going to tell you what it's not. It's not putting your children in a virtual school and
Yeah.
having them sit in front of a computer all day.
Yeah.
It's not working with the government and getting a public school curriculum and teaching that at home. That to me is not homeschooling.
Thank you.
Homeschooling is homeschooling is really when you've got you have an understanding of the vision that you have for training your children, not only their mind but also developing their character, right? Because those two go together. And so we want to. So, anyways, that's the definition of homeschooling: is that we're not. It's not virtual school. It's not public school at home. But we're really understanding what an education is. What do we want for our children?
Mhm.
And then we set out to give it to our children. So when you're homeschooling that way, which is really independent of the government, I mean, it takes some courage, but honestly, it's so much easier than doing it through the government.
Yeah.
These children who are homeschooled this way, first of all, they don't lose their creativity. I
Yeah.
mean, are you familiar, Michelle, with the George Land study?
No, tell me.
So fascinating. Well, he was hired by NASA. NASA had a problem, and the problem was that they had some big problems that needed solving,
Mhm.
but they couldn't figure out who the most creative people were in their organization. And so they
Mhm.
hired George Land to figure it out. So what he did was he created this test, and he gave it to all the employees. So it was successful. They were able to determine who the most creative problem solvers were. But then
Mhm.
he got interested in this idea of creativity. And so he asked the question, well, where does it come from? So he
Mhm.
has this novel idea to give the same exam, the same test that he'd given to all these NASA employees. He
To
said, let
kids.
me give this to 4 and 5-year-old
I
children.
do know this study.
Yeah,
Now I
it's a
know it.
famous study. Yeah,
Yes.
it's just so brilliant. And what he found was that 98% of these children,
Mhm.
their imaginations tested in the zone of genius. And so they test them every 5 years, right? So the next 5 years they test them again. Now it's dropped down to 30%. And then the next 5 years they test them again. Now it's down to 15%. By the time they're adults, it's completely flipped. 98% of people are now operating out of the zone of genius, and only 2% of adults maintain that. So I think it's one of the things that we can preserve when we're homeschooling our children, just that natural genius and
Yeah.
curiosity and love of learning. I mean, kids come into the world, like we all know, they want to know,
Yeah.
like from the
Totally.
minute they're born. Yeah.
Yeah, they crave learning. I have my daughter who's, 19 now, she's a freshman in college, but she was reading really early on her own, really, and
Yeah.
in, like, preschool, she was reading Harry Potter, and she loved to read, and she was a voracious reader, and she would read,
Yeah.
billboards all over Los Angeles that were totally inappropriate, like,
Okay. Oh no.
asking me what HIV is, and, like, I was just like, wait, we're not ready for all this," but by the time she got to middle school, she hated reading.
Yeah.
She just
Yeah.
absolutely hated it, and she's a very
Yeah.
bright kid, and it
Yeah.
shut her down because it was so compulsory, and she wasn't able to choose what she wanted to read, and so my whole thought is if I were ever to do homeschooling, which I'm never having more kids, but if I could have.
You'll have grandkids.
Yes, I know, and I can advocate.
Yeah.
Um, I love the idea of unschooling, like, just this
Yeah.
idea of letting kids explore. What's your
Yeah.
take on that on the
Yeah,
idea of
I mean, I
unschooling?
also like the idea of unschooling. I just don't
Mhm.
like it as a primary means of an education because the idea, I mean, real traditional unschooling, and I hear people use it in all different
Yeah.
ways. Like they'll talk about their schedule and they'll call it unschooling. So, real traditional unschooling comes out of John Holt,
Yes.
his understanding.
Yeah.
And it's really the idea of just letting your children direct their education. And I
Mhm.
think it's a beautiful idea. And I definitely encourage my students to do that
Yeah.
because that kind of, I mean, we all know if we're learning something that we're just not interested in, it's like we're just up against a brick wall.
That's
So
right.
obviously when we're interested in something, we're going to learn more, much more, and we're also going to dive deeper into it.
Right.
The only issue I take with it though, and I do think it should be incorporated into any program,
Yep.
but the only thing is that children are children and they don't know what they need to know in order to function as an adult.
Right.
So, I mean, there's subjects that they really need to understand, like communication, just the ability to have a voice and to
Yeah.
speak
Mhm.
intelligibly, to be able to develop a persuasive argument
Mhm.
and argue your position and these things that give us a voice in the world and help us to understand ourselves and how the world works.
Yeah.
So I think that is on us as adults to really determine, okay, what do my kids need to function in the world and to
Mhm.
really understand the world and to understand who they are.
Yeah.
And within that, I love unschooling. You got to sprinkle any kind of an education with a lot of unschooling.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah,
Like you said, if you I mean, I was never a really good student until I got to graduate school, and then I liked what I was studying, and so then I got straight A's, and so
exactly.
it didn't make sense to me until then because the subject matter was too varied, I think. What about
Yeah.
kids getting into college? What do you see for, homeschoolers?
Yeah, I think kids are, I mean, from what I've seen of the homeschooled kids that I know and from what I've
Mhm,
heard in general, I
mhm,
mean, I was always told, and I believe this is true, though I didn't experience it, that the colleges will actually go out and recruit homeschooled kids because they know they're such great students
mhm,
and they're interested in learning. And they also know that they have a real sense of who they are.
mm,
So they're inclined to go on and do things in life.
mhm.
But I haven't, I mean, everybody that I've ever known, college is not an issue at all because here's what I always say, don't focus on college. Like,
Right,
just forget about college.
right.
Focus on raising and educating your child in the best way that you can.
Yeah,
And if you can do that, college is easy. And the
yeah,
thing that I think is most important today for parents to really understand, I feel so bad for parents raising kids today because I think they're up against so much.
yeah.
But if you can maintain your child's creativity and
Mhm,
sense of motivation and interest in learning and love of learning,
mhm.
those are the children that when they grow up to be adults, they're going to be in demand because we have
Yeah.
such a dearth of creative thinkers, problem solvers
Well, and
now. So,
also our schools are designed to create factory workers and people who listen to
yeah,
directions and follow rules and stand up
yeah,
and sit down and line up, and that isn't what our society is made up of anymore. You have to be
no,
a free thinker, you have to be a creative, or you probably won't do as well in life.
yeah,
And
yeah, no, exactly. It's
yeah. Tell me about the socialization part, because I know people worry about that piece too.
I know people
Yeah.
worry about that, and it's
Yeah.
ironic. I don't know if it was a myth that was propagated. I mean, or just it just came out of a kind of a fear. I don't know how that got out there, but the truth is, and from what I've seen in my own experience, I mean, if you try to talk to a 12-year-old who's been in school, it's like pulling teeth. But when you try to talk to a 12-year-old who's been homeschooled, I mean, they can talk forever because
Yeah.
they're so interested in so many things and they can always find something to connect with people about. I
Mhm.
think that homeschool children, as long as the parent is social and the parent's teaching the manners and, they're helping their children to understand how you behave,
Mhm.
in civil society, then the children, because they're not in a classroom with children their own age all day long, they're actually out with, older people, maybe grandparents, older people in their neighborhood. I mean, my kids just knew everybody. And
Yeah.
then younger children too. So they're just exposed to so many different age groups that they don't have a concept of, oh, they're not 12, so I don't talk to them,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. And so these children in school, as we know, I mean, I went through the system too. It's you learn to relate to people your own age, and everybody
Mhm.
else's everything. So it's age segregated.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other countries in the world where everything's very family um, centered, like there's no age segregation, and
Right.
I think that's just much more natural. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the socialization thing, just to answer your question, it's largely a myth.
And
Yes.
do
Yeah.
homeschooling kids have friends? I mean, that I think that was the thing. My
Yeah.
daughter wanted to homeschool, and she's like, "But I won't have any friends, mom."
Yeah, the thing is, Michelle, if you start out when the children are really young,
Yeah.
then they make homeschooled friends. I think it's hard for parents. I mean, I know I've worked with plenty of parents who've done it.
Mhm.
Um, but once children are into school and they've got their circle of friends, it's then very hard to pull a child out.
Yeah.
You've got to have a homeschooling community that you can really quickly plug them into. But
Yeah.
no, I mean, my kids were super social. Yeah, we had
Yeah.
park days with other homeschoolers. We did outings with other homeschoolers. A lot of my friends, from California like you, and so
Yeah.
a lot of people homeschool there. So it was
Yeah.
super easy for us in that way. Not
Yeah.
everybody has that kind of a situation, and they just have to make more of an effort. And I always say, if you don't have a homeschooling group in your, where you are, start one.
Start one, create
It just
one,
takes
yeah.
one.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
This was so good. Let me one more question. So,
sure.
if people are worried about, starting this journey or they're, concerned that they're not gonna get their kid all the things they need, what advice do you give them?
Yes, I would just say you can't do worse than public school. Like literally, you
I love
can't do
that.
worse. Yeah, it's what I always tell parents. Like, don't worry about failing your children because the school's doing that for us. You want to do better. And so if you
Yeah.
just stay away, I mean, just really learn what education, what the purpose of an education, what the best way to educate your child, really
Mhm.
get a grasp of that. I mean, I help parents do that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of work to dig into that. So that's kind of what I do. I make it easy for
Yeah,
them in the
tell us
sense that
what
I've
you
already done it.
Yeah, tell us exactly what you do, Liz.
Yeah, sure. So I basically work with homeschooling parents. So I have a homeschooling organization. So I have a whole course basically based on the six principles of education.
Mhm.
And so I walk them through each step of homeschooling, everything they need to know. So, from, why are we educating our children to planning? Because one of the things that you hear online a lot is, it's just all kind of relaxed and easy and let's have a good time with our kids. All that's lovely. I'm not saying don't, but kids need structure and
Yeah,
we need to know where we're going with our kids. So we do need a plan in place.
right.
And so I go over planning. I go over curriculum too, because it is really difficult to try to figure out, okay, what do I teach my kids? When do I teach them? How do I teach them? So I
Yeah,
go over all that in my course. And then also character development's a big thing too, because I think that's very misunderstood today. I'm sure you know, Michelle, just
yeah,
like how do you raise a child with good character? And then I have a whole parenting section too, just to support the whole character development. And
yeah,
then have a section on making it all fun. So yeah, so that is what I help parents do. Just I really want parents to understand, like, you can do this. You really
yeah,
can. It
yeah.
just takes patience, determination, understanding.
So
Yeah, and you
love
don't have to worry about college.
so lovely, and where can people find you?
Yeah, so the my website is smarthomeschooler.com. So it's smart and then homeschool with an ER at the end. So for the parents,
Great.
smarthomeschooler.com. Yeah. And the email is support@smarthomeschooler.com.
Amazing, we'll
Yeah.
put it in our show notes so people
Oh,
can
thank you.
find it. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah,
great.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, this was so lovely. I wish I would have known you 20 years ago and I could have
Oh,
started all over, but I hope
well,
other people out there, can get started now because I think it's a lovely journey.
yes,
Yeah,
yes. Thank you, Michelle.
of
Yeah, it's definitely
course.
a good time to get started for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, thank